Welcome to the 4th District Congressional Candidate Forum. My name is Richard Nelson. I'm the founder and the executive director of the Commonwealth Policy Center. I know many of you are familiar with me. I've spoken to a number of groups up here over the years. And some of you also know that Mike Parman, the former state auditor, you all know Mike, Second Mike, joined our team year and a half ago. And I was telling Mike about the culture at CPC where, of course, we're a principled, robust, fully conservative public policy group. And we have this culture of transparency, a culture where it's safe and we can build each other up and even offer constructive criticism. And I hardly got those words out of my mouth when Mike said, "Well, Richard, when you speak in front of groups, you need to tell more jokes." Now, those of you who are laughing, you know that means something because Mike is the guy who'd bring a little levity to the Lincoln dinners and the other Republican events. And he does have a good sense of humor. So in honor of Mike, I told him, Mike, I'm going to try working out my jokes. So politics in general reminds me of the story of these two young boys who were hired to muck out a horse stall. And this horse barn was neglected for years. And the stalls were almost to the top with manure and old straw. And it was a mess. And the guy who hired him was kind of watching the boys work, and one of the guys was just getting after it and shoveling the manure and getting it out of there. And the other kid was grumbling and kind of kicking and angry. And like, as if the man went up to the boys after and said, "Hey, I noticed that this guy's not real happy, but you got this gleam in your eye, and you're working hard. And what's going on here?" And the guy said, "Well," the young boy said, "Well, I figured with all the manure in here, there's got to be a pony somewhere." Some of you laugh. This is why I don't tell jokes. I'm not trying to make jokes about political leaders. In fact, it's honorable leaders who are in it for the right reason, and they're doing the right thing, and they're principled and working for the betterment of our country and our community. So please don't interpret anything about horses or their anatomy or manure and extrapolate that on any elected officials or leaders. So few of you even laughed at that. So I'm going to stick to the serious part. That's the part that Mike says I do good at, being serious and serious-minded. So I want to thank the Northern Kentucky Tea Party, the Northern Kentucky Young Republicans, and the Boone County Republican Party for sponsoring this event. It's an honor to be asked to moderate this forum. For the record, both candidates running for the 4th District congressional seat have been invited. All efforts were made to work around the schedules of both candidates. Congressman Massie's here. Thank you for joining us. Ed Gallrein chose not to respond. We double checked this morning just to see if anything changed, but that is not the case. So it changes up the format a little bit. We were not going to not do this. It wouldn't be fair. This is something that's been planned for some time. But it will be Congressman Massie. I will pitch him the questions, quasi-forum format. So with that said, Congressman Massie, one other thing too, the questions have been provided by the groups who sponsored this forum. So I've been fielding questions every last week from Republicans, Tea Party members, and I'm going to be relaying those to Congressman Massie. So Congressman Massie, if you can come on up and take a seat and we'll get started. Who's Russell? Very good. So welcome to the candidate forum. As was planned, there were going to be opening statements for both candidates. So since you're the only ones, 2 minutes for the opening statement, then I'm going to pitch you questions. So good.
Okay. Yeah.
Very good.
I appreciate this opportunity. I think this is the 6th debate that I've tried to add. Conventional wisdom is if you're ahead and you're in the incumbent, you'd be crazy to go into a debate. But I think it's different in this situation. You all have seen $10 million of TV ads so far. This is the most expensive congressional primary this cycle right now, and the most expensive one ever in the state of Kentucky. And I figure if you have to sit there and watch each of us do scripted responses for 30 seconds that they're edited, we get 10 chances to make that commercial and they take the best one. I think you deserve to see us in the real world, taking real questions. And, this is what I do every day. I advocate for you all. I walk out of the chamber of the House of Representatives. Some of my colleagues take the tunnels and they hide. They get back to their office without ever seeing the public and without ever seeing a reporter. I walk out into the piranhas and they attack me. And I actually got to the point where I enjoy talking to them and answering their questions in rapid format because that's how I advocate for you. That goes on TV. And the principles that I put forward in my platform that then you vote for, I go up there and I defend those. And you have to be able to debate. If you're going to debate Nancy Pelosi and AOC, you better be comfortable here in a library before you go to that. Thank you for going ahead and doing this event. Like I can't tell you how much I've worked with my calendar to try to work the other 4 or 5 events in, and then they cancel them after I move heaven and earth to make sure I can show up. And so I appreciate you following through and having this.
Yes, you're welcome. Congressman Massie, I'd like to start with one of your signature issues, and that is federal spending and the national debt. This was a big issue when you first ran back in 2012 in that special election. It was $12 trillion then. Today, the federal debt, according to the U.S. Treasury, is over $39 trillion. So here's the question. What's it going to take to get Congress to spend responsibly, to not to keep racking up that debt?
Well, they all care about the debt and spending to some degree. They just don't care about it as much as I do. So I built this debt badge to try to shame them, or to at least induce some anxiety. It displays the debt every second of the day, and it's moving so fast your eyes start spinning trying to follow it. The problem is when I wear it in an elevator with Adam Schiff or Nancy Pelosi, they've asked me if it's a step count. So my goal of instilling some anxiety did not work. I was trying to explain that nobody can run 85,000 steps a second. It's how fast the encounter is moving. So it's actually, in fact, our debt. So the debt badge didn't work. Unfortunately, I think it might take some kind of crisis. And I am surprised. When I came in, it was less than half of what the debt is now. And so I thought if we were just a year or two away from collapse then. But here we've made it to 39 trillion. How did we do it? It's because we're the world's reserve currency. And we are able to print money when we can't get the banks and the other countries to loan it to us. And what happens when we print money, you're diluting everybody's store of money when they have money. But it turns out that foreign countries hold US dollars because it's the standard. If you want to buy something with US dollars, you have to hold them. You have to have them in your wallet. It's US dollars are in the wallet of almost every civilized country, and especially the uncivilized countries, they deal in cash, right? And what happens is when we print more money, we're diluting their money as well. And that's how we kept the musical chairs going, is we're not just diluting our own sovereign holdings, like your retirement accounts. We're diluting everybody's account around the world. I think the music could end if we lose reserve currency status. If fewer and fewer countries hold the US dollar, then as we print more of them, it's going directly to Americans and not to people overseas, that kind of inflation and devaluation of dollars.
Yeah. You mentioned it's going to take a crisis for either the U.S. dollars no longer the reserve or something else that would happen. How far, you also said that you thought that we were 1 or 2 years or not far from seeing a collapse. What other breaking points do you see? We've got inflation. We've seen over the last several years, gas prices are high. There's a loss of consumer confidence. Are there other things you see on the horizon that could maybe bring this into focus again, the need for fiscal responsibility at the federal level and the need to get the debt under control.
Well, Puerto Rico actually became insolvent a few years ago. And the problem with them is as you become riskier to loan money to, they raise the interest rates. And then Puerto Rico was paying interest rates that they couldn't afford, and then they had to borrow more money. So one of the milestones, I've been looking for these milestones, and we just recently passed it, is we're actually paying $1 trillion of interest every year now. To put that into perspective, I'm on the transportation committee. That's more than 12 times our annual budget for roads and bridges in this country. We're paying in interest, but it's also $1 trillion of interest. And the reason it's got so high isn't just because the principal that we owe has gone up, the interest rates have gone up. We have less control over the interest rates. The Fed, the president asked the Fed to lower interest rates. The problem is their levers connected with a rubber band, and they've stretched it so far that they could lower interest rates, but the banks still aren't going to loan you money to buy a car at those interest rates because it's connected with a rubber band. So that's why it's gone to $1 trillion of interest, and that's what's hurting us. And $1 trillion, just as a benchmark, is our entire defense budget. So our military could be twice as strong, or our roads and bridges, we could spend 12 times as much on our roads and bridges. And when I got to Congress, the other mistake I made, besides thinking that we were just a few years away from financial ruin, was that my grandkids would end up paying for this debt. It turns out we're paying for it. I didn't realize that at first. I thought, yeah, we're just borrowing the money and racking up the interest and rotating it to another credit card. But the reality is there's a cost associated with that. And so to maintain the interest payments on the debt, we have printed money here and there, and that hurts us with deflation. And then also when interest rates go up, that hurts us. It's harder to move to buy a different house. So when it makes more sense to live somewhere else or to downsize a house, it's hard to justify it because you're going to be paying a lot more on the mortgage. So there's a lot of harm from the interest rates too. So my point is, it kind of already has caught up with us, and we are paying for it instead of waiting for our grandkids to pay for it.
Very good. The next topic is trust and accountability. According to a Gallup poll taken back in February, 80% of Americans disapprove the way Congress is handling its job. Only 16% approve. I don't know what happened to the other 4%. Particularly, Congressman Massie, young voters deeply distrust Congress. So here's the question. What does Congress need to do to regain the confidence of voters? And I have a follow-up.
Well, my argument would be with the 16% who trust Congress. I think that's too high. There may be an opportunity for me to talk about this in the context of another question, but this is something I really wanted to talk about, and I think it fits here. And that is, Congress needs to separate the bills instead of putting everything in one giant bill or one giant omnibus. Because what happens is, and this is why you shouldn't trust anybody in Congress, we're reduced to 1 or 2 votes a year that matter, and they've got everything in it. And how, when you ask your congressman, do you support this or do you support that? I talk to groups that come in all day long in my office, and they're like, would you support this cancer research? Would you support this? Would you support that? And I would support cancer research because it's not the sort of thing that states can do effectively, 50, groups at a time. And then there is a benefit to society. But the problem is there's never a standalone vote on cancer research. It's always, everything is in one giant bill. So I think to restore trust, the Congress needs to restore transparency, which is to separate these votes. And that's what I did the 2 years that I was on the Rules Committee. So last Congress, I had 4 committees. I say I had too many credit hours and I missed the drop date. And I swore I would never be on 4 committees again. Now, I'm on 2 committees now, not because they kicked me off, but because I felt like I could be more effective being on 2 committees than I could 4. But one of those committees I was on is the Rules Committee. And when I was on that committee, I forced the 72-hour rule. Congress has a rule that you have to get, not just us, but everybody has to have 72 hours before we vote on a bill. The problem is the Rules Committee suspends that rule nearly every week. And they did it just at 2 a.m. on Friday morning. I was on the floor of the House of Congress, and they were bringing up a bill that people hadn't read because they suspended the 72-hour rule. When I was on the Rules Committee, I forced them to follow the 72-hour rule. And they did when I was on the Rules Committee, and I forced them to have 400 separate votes. Yes, they hated me for breathing air. And so those are the things I think that would increase trust, is to give people time to read the bills instead of saying, vote for it, then we'll tell you what's.
So the follow-up is regarding Congress, congressmen and women able to trade on individual stocks. Would you favor members of being banned from trading individual stocks while they're serving?
I have, by the way, I have not gotten rich in Congress. You can look, my financial disclosure form is the same as it was in 2012 when I filled out the first one. And basically my only asset is a farm. Okay. So maybe the trees got more valuable because of inflation, but the housing market's down. So I'm not even sure that's true. So I think, and I bought one stock since I've been in Congress. But I announced it. I disclosed it. It's Tesla. Here's what I think we should do. And this is counterintuitive. If Nancy Pelosi and those folks have some kind of insider information, make them share it with you. So if the congressman's going to make a stock trade, put it in escrow 48 hours before the stock trade, announce you're going to make the stock trade, let the market use that information for 48 hours. And then the stockbroker has to buy the stock at whatever the new price is. I think that would be an innovative way. Yeah. I mean, if they got insider information, share it. But I would be fine with them banning, not just, here's the problem. You can put all these rules on members of Congress that then they use, or other politicians, then they use their kids, their wives. Like there are members of Congress who have wives who are lobbyists. That should not be the case. Yeah. They manage a lot of stocks, the family does. So I think you also would have to anticipate the outlets, the loopholes. And you would probably also, the staff won't say this is fair, but the staff have more information than the congressman. I think you'd have to ban theirs as well.
Yeah, very good. Your solution sounds like a free market idea to that very real. Yeah. I want to move to something that I have really been reluctant to put out there in candidate forums, but it's an issue that receives a whole lot of public attention. Is one that you're involved with. Back in November, you were part of a group that forced a vote to compel the release of the Epstein files. That was the Epstein Files Transparency Act that passed in November, but not all of the files have been released. The Department of Justice claimed that they'd fulfilled the legal obligations, even though, according to the last information I have, 2.5 million pages have not been released. So again, two parts here. Why is this issue important? And then secondly, what can be done to compel the Department of Justice to abide by the law?
Well, let me tell you why I did it this way, why I did it as a law. I have spent 12 years either on the Oversight Committee or the Judiciary Committee, which has oversight over the Attorney General, the ATF, and the FBI. And the Oversight Committee can call anybody in. And I can't count on my hands the number of times I've asked somebody in a public hearing, what about this information? And they'll say, I'm sorry, sir, that's the subject of an ongoing investigation, and department rules prohibit us from releasing that information. And I've looked at the FBI director, Christopher Wray or Merrick Garland. They've both given me those answers. So did Stephen Dettelbach, the head of the ATF. They'll look you in the eyes and tell you, I'm not going to answer you. And then a few times, I have never completely lost it on them, but it's very frustrating. I think I did remind one of them that we created the Department of Justice. We created the ATF. We created the DOJ. We can uncreate those departments. Yeah. We fund you. And I knew if we were going to get those files, it wouldn't be by asking somebody in a hearing. And then also, I knew a subpoena wasn't going to work, because if you subpoena the stuff, particularly what we wanted was from the DOJ, and they don't give it to you, what's the next move? You find them in contempt of Congress. What do you do after that? You refer it. Who do you refer it to? The DOJ. Like, it's a circular problem. It seemed like there was no way to ever force them to come up with it, until I realized that if I did a discharge petition and made it a U.S. law passed by the House and the Senate and signed by the president, that they could go to jail for not complying with it. It's not a pretty please, mother may I, whenever you can get to a question in a hearing. It is now a U.S. law, part of U.S. code, and it will be possibly for 100 or 200 years. And, it goes on forever until somebody repeals. So what that means is the next attorney general can prosecute this attorney general for not following this law. It's very different from everything that preceded it, because like you remember Fast and Furious, we had Eric Holder. He refused to come to Congress. We found him in contempt and we referred it to Eric Holder. Yeah. Well, and then what did was he worried? No, because that contempt expired at the end of the Congress. And so did the subpoena. And so the administration could change. He just waited it out. And the Epstein Files Transparency Act gets around that problem because it doesn't expire and they can't wait us out. And that's the only reason they haven't blown us off, even though I passed it. They've produced 3 million documents. Now, they have faulty legal interpretation. They're not following the law. There are 4 categories of documents they haven't released, but I'll focus on just one. They claim they have deliberative privilege, deliberative process privilege. So if you did a Freedom of Information Act on the government is only obligated to give you their final decision, their work product. They're not obligated under this deliberative process rule. They're not obligated to show you how they got to that decision. Well, we knew this would be a problem with the Epstein files. We want to know why they didn't prosecute these men. We want to know why Jeffrey Epstein got off in 2008 and was allowed to create 1,000 more victims. We wanted to know their deliberative process. So we put it in the law. We said, you have to give us internal emails, memos, any documents about your decision on whether to prosecute or investigate or not. They are right now asserting, Todd Blanche was doing this. Some people ask, will things change if he's attorney general? No, they won't change. He was always the guy running the show. He's just now the guy in the hot seat. But they twice sent Congress a memo that says, we don't have to give you these internal decisions because we have deliberative process privilege. That legal argument wouldn't stand 30 seconds at court. So I think eventually that problem will get solved. One of the survivors may sue. They would have standing in front of a court, and then this issue would go in front of a judge, and he would say, of course you have to produce these documents. The new law overrides the old law. Yeah. 3 judges have already said that with respect to grand jury material. I don't know if you remember, but when I embarked on this and started putting pressure to release these files, they said, well, these are grand jury documents, and under 6E, we can't release grand jury documents. And so this administration, as soon as my bill passed, they went to the 3 judges, Southern District of New York for Maxwell and Epstein, and then Southern District of Florida for Epstein. And the DOJ asked the judges, can you give us the grand jury material now that Massie passed this bill? And the DOJ was hoping to get a no answer. But all 3 judges said, well, as a matter of fact, here's how the law works. Their bill overrides Rule 6E. Here's all your grand jury material. And so that's how we got that piece up. There's still more. By the way, if I win, whether I win or lose this election, I'm going to watch this play out for the next several years because it is a law, not a subpoena, that expires at the end of my term.
Very good. I'm going to move on. The next topic is sanctity of human life. Early in one of your campaigns, you said that Roe v. Wade, and I quote, is one of the greatest judicial travesties of our time. And then you went on to say that you believe that life begins at conception. Still the same?
Yes, absolutely.
Here's the next part of this. The Biden administration fast-tracked and solidified chemical abortion inducing drugs. They expanded their use from 7 to 10 weeks of gestation. They've allowed telemed abortion and mail order abortions without doctor supervision. And a recent report recently found that around 10% of pregnant women using these abortion pills, the abortion pill method, are experiencing or have experienced serious side effects. Here's a question. Would you favor federal legislation going back to previous policy, which required medical supervision before prescribing these kind of drugs?
Absolutely. Yes. I would ban it. And furthermore, I think one of the reasons my opponent didn't show up today is he's afraid of that question. I am told by the Right to Life groups, one recommends me, the other has endorsed me, that he didn't fill out the forms. And so we don't know where he stands. And this is an area where Donald Trump and I disagree. I don't want to dwell on it, but he believes in certain exceptions. And I do not.
That was my next question. So I want to press into that. Just so the audience is aware, when we talk about abortion exceptions, under Kentucky law, Kentucky is one of 12, maybe 13 states, if you consider Indiana, that has an abortion ban, except to save the life of the mother. So when we talk about abortion exceptions, that is a significant one that's accepted in the pro-life community. There are other exceptions, rape or incest. So where do you stand on those issues? Beyond saving the life of the mother?
Beyond saving life of the mother, no, I do not for those exceptions.
And that is something.
And I could lose votes by saying that.
Yeah.
I know that. But that's okay.
Yeah. And the reason why the pro-life community is concerned about this is Roe v. Wade got to be law because of very hard cases and heartbreaking cases that people should care about. But it begins with a hard case, and it's been said before that hard cases make that law. I'll just leave it at that. That's enough commentary. I'm supposed to be the moderator, but that's enough.
Thank you. We don't seem to have an opinion at all.
I know that that's an important issue, though, for many Kentucky voters, and obviously enough for our state legislature to pass a dozen, maybe 13 pro-life laws in the last 9 years, I want to say. So it is an important issue.
I do sponsor federal legislation because it's that important. The right to own a firearm, the right to free speech. Initially, the Bill of Rights did not apply to the states. And so each state had its own constitution. And after the 14th Amendment was passed, which guarantees liberty for everybody, various Supreme Court rulings have incorporated those parts of the Bill of Rights as applying to the states, like the Second Amendment. So I do think, there's different ways you could get at arguing that the federal government still has a role here. And so I do still sponsor federal legislation, but I am glad that the states have acted to stop these things. And, a lot of this murder, for instance, I didn't know this until I got elected. I'm not a lawyer, but I serve on the Judiciary Committee. Murder is a state crime. And so if you commit a murder, go to a state court. If you're convicted, if you're suspected of murder, you go to the state court. And if you're convicted, you go to a state jail. So the state also has a role in this.
Yeah, very good. Very good. I think I'm going to go to, there are a number of attack ads against you. They first began.
Roll tape. I've never seen.
I did my homework, Congressman Massie, and there's some interesting ones out there. And I thought it'd be good to give you an opportunity to address some of them. There was one that was launched after the one big, beautiful bill was voted on. You were one of maybe 2 Republicans in Congress that voted against it.
Yeah, I wonder why they don't attack the other guy.
But there's one ad. It was done by a group called MAGA Kentucky. This came out in the summer of 2025, and this is what the text said of this ad. Massie voted to allow transgender procedures on this is my term, gender dysphoric minors. You voted against tax cuts and saving Kentucky families $10,000. It goes to Trump. Trump is securing our border and deporting criminal aliens, but Thomas Massie voted against it. And the reference, by the way, was to House Bill 145. That was a big, beautiful bill. And then after the last thing they say, after we launched the U.S. launched a strike against Iran's nuclear program, it says that you sided with Democrats, picture of you with Nancy Pelosi and some others there, with Democrats and the Ayatollah. I want to give you a chance to respond to this ad. There's a lot like that. A lot and it's all over the place. But you sure this is not a debate? Okay. You've been able to respond to something like this before.
No, I appreciate that. Let me, and this is a category of ways they lie, but I'll use the example of sex change for minors. Okay. There was a standalone bill offered by Marjorie Taylor Greene that I voted for to defund and ban that where there's a federal nexus, which is appropriate. So you can look at that standalone bill and know where I stand. Now, on the big, beautiful bill, it is true. There was, in the first draft of it, it defunded sex changes for minors. Okay. But then the final, and I voted against it. So if you want to leave out the context, you could run that ad and say that without, being a complete liar. But the problem is the final bill, the final big bill, they took that out. It was a bait and switch. And it was to get conservatives who knew it was busting the budget to get them to vote for it at least once. So then they get their hands dirty. And they've already voted for a bill that increases spending. But then the Republican leadership in the House and the Senate pulls out the defunding of transgender surgeries. So everybody who voted for the final version of the big, beautiful bill voted to fund transgender surgeries. Like, you could run the ad either way on anybody that voted either way on the big, beautiful bill. It's crazy. And the same thing goes, like there was defunding for Planned Parenthood. Okay, in one of these bills, but they figured out a way to put it back somewhere else. And to the extent it was ever defunded, it's still funded. As far as the border goes, on standalone votes on the border, I have voted for the wall. I voted for DHS, for ICE and Customs and Border Patrol twice, most recently to fund that. But in that bill, they had some extra money for it in that bill. The big, beautiful bill it basically took Joe Biden's budget, and instead of reprioritizing things, it just added $400 billion to it. Until they happened upon this transgender surgery thing and they stick it in every bill, they want to run an ad against people who vote against it. If you're conservative, it used to be a pay raise for the soldiers. So every bill has a pay raise for the soldiers. So that if you vote against it, then I'll give you another example. There was one bill that defunded health care for congressmen, like, special kind of health care. And this was when Eric Cantor was the majority leader. He sat down beside me. He said, well, you don't want to see an ad saying you voted for your own health care, keep your own cushy health care. And I looked at him and said, I don't take the congressional health care. He went and found somebody else who should say that. Like they literally stick this stuff in the bill, knowing they'll add the money somewhere else, or they'll add it back to the bill, so that they can run those ads. And that's the nature of those ads.
How about the provision about voting against tax cuts and saving Kentucky families? I think you've kind of answered, but in particular, saving Kentucky families $10,000. I'm not exactly sure what.
Yeah, I'm not sure how many of you in this room feel $10,000 richer this year than you did last year. I don't know what you did with it. I hope you bought guns. Here's the thing. Those tax cuts, I wanted so badly to vote for that big bill because two of those bills were mine. I've carried a bill since the day I got to Congress to remove taxes on Social Security. And now, as it turns out, they said that's what they were going to do in the big, beautiful bill. They didn't do it. They said Senate rules prevented it. They've still messaged it like that. They just increased the standard deduction for seniors instead of taking away taxes on Social Security. But still, I could have voted for that bill and said, look, they got a version of my bill in this bill. And the no tax on tips, that was actually a Ron Paul bill that, he had written. And I took it, copied it. I did R&D. I ripped off and duplicated Ron Paul's. And they put that in there too. I thought it was a great idea. But when you're faced with these two things, and it took me a while, this was probably my third year in Congress, when I realized if you are faced with cutting spending or cutting taxes, and you can only have one, cutting spending is the right answer, because the spending is the tax rate.
Yeah.
You are going to pay for that spending either through inflation or debt or interest on the debt, or they're going to find another tax you don't know about and stick that in there. And so it's the spending that is the tax. And so ultimately in that big bill, it was the spending that I knew was going to cause inflation and hardship for families here. And I knew it would be more than offset any claim of $10,000. Look, during COVID, they did the same thing. Those stimulus bills that had, the first one was $2.2 trillion. It had $1,200 checks for everybody. What's the problem with that? That amounted to like 5% of the bill was those $1,200 checks. The other 95% went to banks and businesses and not Americans. And it's sort of what I call the cheese in the trap. There's always a little cheese in the trap. And the mice always wonder why it's free. Well, there is no free lunch. And so those tax cuts, by the way, it's a reconciliation bill. They do this so they only need 50 votes in the Senate. But the rule is it has to eventually balance. So how did they make this big monstrosity balance? It doesn't balance until the 10th year. They have 10 years to make it balance. So what's going to happen to all the no tax on tips, the lower tax on seniors, no tax on overtime? It all expires in 3 years. What happens to the $400 billion, that extra money for the military, for the DOJ, and for border enforcement? They stuck $400 billion and more spending in there. It ends in 3 years in their fairy tale plan, so that in years 4 through 10, they can show they're going to save money and the whole thing will balance one day. The problem is I've been there 10 years. I've seen 10-year plans, and none of them last more than a year. They certainly don't last more than 2 years because the next Congress is never bound to the same agreements that new people get elected, lose their elections, or they have scandals and resign to change, which is a more frequent way now. So it's a bait and switch. They got any tax benefit in there goes away in 3 years.
Very good. I'm going to move on to the foreign policy topic. There is an ad by a group called the Republican Jewish Victory Fund. They're running this against you, saying that you stand with Iran and the radical leftists in Congress opposing Trump. So take off of the previous ad that I mentioned. So do you stand with Iran?
No.
Do you stand with the leftists in Congress?
I do not. But let me explain again the basis for that claim. The Constitution is clear. Like, the power to declare war exists in Congress. And I think it's wise. Here's why. And by the way, they did this both times in Iraq and in Afghanistan. The Congress, they didn't fully declare war, but they did in AUMF. And this war has started without even an AUMF. Now, in the beginning, they said it's too early to vote because we're not at war yet. And then we go to war and they say, too late, we're already at war. And so one way or another, Congress gets out of voting. Here's why you should vote. Because once a war starts, you are obligated to pay for it. And I think Congress needs to debate it so that the goals don't change. I think our men and women who go over there to fight, they deserve clear objectives so that when they achieve them, by the way, and to achieve them, they deserve the right equipment, rules of engagement that aren't stupid. I've talked to veterans who came back from Afghanistan, and some of the rules of engagement basically tie their hands behind their back. Or you've seen stories. People were not allowed to put the magazine in the gun, like that sort of thing. So that when they use those rules of engagement and that equipment and they're deployed and they achieve all the objectives, they get wrong. And if we don't, that's the least that we owe our members and military.
So, to your point, Congress is given the constitutional authority to declare war. There have been, I believe, 2 efforts to have a war powers resolution. I think one was just proposed and voted on the other day. How did you vote on that?
So the first one we voted on was the one I wrote. So I guess they sided with me. I'm sorry.
Okay.
This second one I didn't write. I only need to write one of these every Congress, I figure, because it does get me in trouble. And I did vote for the second one too. And there's a milestone coming on May 29. Regardless of whether Congress votes or not, the president is obligated to pull the troops back according to the law on May 29th, unless we vote for a different kind of resolution that does authorize the war. So it'll be interesting to see what happens then.
Very good. Continuing on with foreign policy, AIPAC, the American Israel Political Action Committee, has spoken about you in the past, criticized you. I guess you put a finer point on it. Do they have an outsized role in America's foreign policy?
They absolutely do. And I'm one of the only Republicans in Congress who doesn't take AIPAC. And it's bundled. So it's not, they do everything differently than every other lobby in DC. Like you don't get a check that says AIPAC on it. You get just checks from individuals that they have directed to be donated. And by the way, I'm not against Israel.
That's my follow-up.
Oh, okay.
Expand on that. That's where we're going, but go ahead.
But we've had votes where they try to equate not just criticism of Israel, but criticism of Benjamin Netanyahu's policies with anti-Semitism. And I believe I'm one of the least xenophobic, not at all racist, not sexist member of Congress. But they try to tag you that way. This is just a trick. If they can equate you to being a bad person, if you vote against their policies, that's what they do. So this is the real story of my race. I've had 6 national media outlets do a profile on this race, and none of them will cover this. This is a question of, because 95% of the money that comes to my opponent is from people who have Israel's interests ahead of America's, whether it's Republican Jewish Coalition Victory Fund or AIPAC or Miriam Adelson or Paul Singer. All of the money comes from this. And the reason they're trying to buy this seat and convince you that I'm not the same person I've been for the last 10 years is because they don't like that I won't vote for foreign aid. And I'm not for fighting for wars where it's not America's interest, it's somebody else's.
So just to be clear, thank you for talking about this. I know there's just a lot of baggage. It's a difficult, just a lot to it. Just to be clear, you in principle are against foreign aid. It's not just against Israel, but
Right.
across the board. And yet the perception continues that there has been pushed, and the narrative's been pushed that you hate Israel, you're against Israel, you're an enemy of all of that. Clarify.
Well, one of my first amendments in Congress to the appropriations process was to defund foreign aid to Egypt. And which ostensibly is not a friend of Israel. But they are the second biggest recipient of foreign aid. If you're not counting military aid, just straight up, we'll give you a few $1 billion. I think Israel gets 3.8 billion, and then Egypt gets $1 billion or more. And so I offered an amendment to defund and one of the reasons I thought it was entirely appropriate is there was a coup going on in Egypt. I'm like, who's even there with the catchers that take the money? There's tanks in their capital, and we're still going to send them the billions of dollars? Don't we want to know who's going to get it? And they came up to me, some staffer on the floor came up to me. This is in 2013. and said, Congressman Massie, we're going to let your amendment go on a voice vote. I said, well, why would you do that? He said, well, because AIPAC and State Department don't want a vote on this amendment. They don't want any negative opinion expressed by members of Congress on to Egypt. And I said, well, how do you know if I don't object, it will go by voice vote? There's 200 Democrats over there. Any of them could stand up. He said, we've already cut a deal. We got a deal with the Democrat leadership, and we can guarantee you none of the 200 Democrats will stand up and object if this goes on a voice vote. And so I was naive. I thought, well, that sounds like a pretty good deal. I mean, my bill will pass unanimously. Is this an IQ test? So I didn't object. We debated it. They called for the vote. They said the ayes have it, and nobody objected. It's like this was. So what happened to my amendment? They stripped it out in the Senate. They knew they were all along, and there wasn't even a recorded vote. And so they actually won that. But the irony here is it was AIPAC who didn't want to stop the money going to Egypt. I guess that's because that keeps Egypt in line. So we're not buying a friend, we're renting one. And that's all over the globe. Anywhere we're getting foreign aid, obviously we're giving foreign aid. It's meant to affect foreign policy, but I'll swear right here, that staffer told me that AIPAC didn't want a recorded vote on aid to Egypt because they didn't want anybody to be critical of it.
Thank you for explaining that. So I'm gonna move ahead to a different topic, probably the 800-pound gorilla in the room, maybe the 800-pound elephant in the room, is that President Donald Trump recruited somebody to run against you. Obviously, we all know that, but he's been personally attacking you and your wife. You don't need to go into the details. The question is this: has this changed the way? There's two things. Has this changed the way you're running your congressional reelection bid? And then the second, to follow up, is how can supporters of you and supporters of President Trump reconcile the two things that are happening here? Because both of you, the support overlaps. But how is this the president engaging? Of course, he was up here just the other month campaigning for your opponent. Trump is still very popular here. Has this changed the way you're running your congressional reelection bid?
Not a bit. I know it must frustrate my opponent. They've sorted through thousands of social media posts, and I've never said anything bad about Donald Trump. Have I been critical of the policy? Yes, absolutely. At times, we agree about 90% of the time, and then there's the 10% where you could actually find he was on the side that I'm on at one point, like the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act that used to spy on Donald Trump. He's now advocating that we should do a clean reauthorization of it. But you could go back and find his tweets where he wanted to kill the program. We don't need to kill the program. We just need to make sure if you're going to spy on Americans, you have a warrant. And so I'm careful to disagree on policy, but not to make it personal. And even when I'm attacked, I did not attack back. When he criticized my marriage, my wife, I joked that my wife said we should have invited him. That's why he's mad. Which is absolutely true. She was like, you should invite the president. I'm like, he's not going to come. Anyways, she blames me for being attacked now because I didn't invite him to a wedding. Then when he said that at the prayer breakfast, he said I was a moron. I'm glad I'm in his prayers. Just be thankful for that, right? So I just, here's why. Because I know when the race is over on May 20th, he will respect me. I know he respects me when I talk to him on the phone, and I've talked to him on the phone many times, even about war in Iran years ago during his first term. He said, I'm more of a libertarian than you are. But he also says that I'm a sharp cookie and I'm a tough cookie. Every time I talk to him on the phone, those are the first words out of his mouth. So much so that I think he might have sharp cookie and tough cookie under his caller ID. You know, and he'll respect me after this. I still respect him as the president of the United States. He did sign the Epstein Files Transparency Act. He could have vetoed it. Then we would have had to try to override his veto, and that could have been very difficult. Because it's one thing to vote for a bill, it's another to try to override a veto. So, even during the midst of all of this, we got a bill passed again. And I look forward to doing that. I'll still need his signature on my bills. And I've got a bill, National Constitutional Carry Bill, I would like to get passed. I've got a bill called the Prime Act I would like to get passed. And so I don't want him to ever have anything where I called him a name.
Congressman Massie, I'm going to move on to what I'm calling the tough, pointed questions submitted by the group, and these are in quotes.
I hope theirs are easier than yours.
Thank you. No, it gets hard. Please, so this was again, somebody from the group. Please pass the Save America Act and take one for the team. Why won't he?
Good. I have voted for the Save America Act every time it's been on the floor. There was one time where the social media folks tried to say I voted against it because I voted against a procedural rule. And remember, I've been on the Rules Committee. Like most members of Congress have no idea what is in a procedural rule when they vote for it. I'm on the floor trying to tell them. Some of them have been there 10 years. They have no idea how the rules work. They were like, well, why are you voting for this procedural rule? It's the rule that allows the SAVE Act to come to the floor. I said, yeah, but it's also got a provision that my staff would call martial law. And they said, what's that? It lets them bring up any spending bill anytime they want this week with no notice and pass it immediately. Any spending bill. And my colleagues are like, really? That's in there? I'm like, yeah, it's in there. It was the kind of stuff I never let them do when I was on the Rules Committee. When they put me on the Rules Committee, reluctantly, I said, I will never let you do this martial law thing where you say we can pass anything we want, anytime we want, and put a penny in the fuse box and override every rule that we want. And that was for spending. So then there's the other argument. If you follow this far, okay, Massie, you voted against a procedural rule. You didn't vote against the SAVE Act, but you voted against a procedural rule that was allowing the SAVE Act to come to the floor. What would have happened if you had 2 or 3 other colleagues that voted with you? Well, that rule would have failed. They would have gone back to the Rules Committee, just like I was on the Rules Committee. If a rule fails, you go back to the Rules Committee and you write another rule to bring the SAVE Act to the floor without the other nonsense in it. That's how you make bills better. And my goal wasn't to stop the SAVE Act. It was to stop them from the leadership from being able to hoodoo all of my colleagues and spend all the money they want in any bill they want to bring to the floor. And if in fact, later that same day, when the actual SAVE Act came to the bill, I voted for it.
Very good. Here's the next tough question. I'm going to have a hard time voting for him if he doesn't vote with Republicans or something since he ran on our ticket. I don't know what the something is. Vote for Republican. How often do you vote with Republicans?
It depends on depends on which group you look at. What does it mean to vote with Republicans? What does it mean to vote with the president? One group has me at 91%. One group has me at 80-some%. It depends on, are you talking about over 12 years, the last year, the last 3 months? But it's somewhere between 80 and 91%. I vote with Republicans. I voted for the SAVE Act. I voted twice to fund DHS and the Border Patrol and ICE here recently. The Democrats have that shut down. I keep voting for that. It's the 10% of the time when they're, in my opinion, on the wrong path, like spending our country into bankruptcy, or covering up the Epstein files. So you could say on the Epstein files, well, he was against Republicans. He was working with Democrats. I wish he would vote with Republicans. Once I forced it to the floor, the bill passed 427-1 in the House and 100-0 in the Senate. Every Republican but one in the House and the Senate voted for that. The fight was on what we were going to vote on and whether we even voted for it. And that's often the case.
Very good. I'm going to move on to the topic of big tech and free speech. This was an issue, particularly back in 2016. Uh, do you support, and this is the question, do you support limiting the power of major big tech companies to censor political speech?
I wish I knew the context, like an example.
Let me give you one that I'm aware of is when it used to be known as Twitter, where what was the term, ghosting or
Shadow ban.
thank you,
Yeah,
shadow banning,
okay.
shadow banning conservative
Yeah.
groups, purposely suppressing so that their message wasn't getting out.
Yeah. So I served on the Weaponization of Government Committee where Twitter files were exposed, and we had those hearings, and is very troubling. What I believe is that if a private organization has the freedom to publish what they want to publish or not, but in the case of the Twitter files, the federal government had enlisted Twitter to censor things. So now you had the White House, Joe Biden's White House had a direct line to Twitter. They had like their own help desk. Hey, what's a hotline? We see, and I was one of the people that got like, they banned one of my posts about natural immunity. They did it twice. But and I didn't know it at the time, but what we found out is these were government funded NGOs like there was a project at Stanford that was using AI and other algorithms to ban, like, it's one thing when you got some bureaucrat sitting there trying to find your stuff and ban it. It's a whole nother thing when an AI is running the program and can ban millions of you almost before you even know you're going to post it, right? And so what was going on was they were agents of the government. And so what we've done, and I've sponsored this bill, and it passed the House. It's not passed the Senate, gives you standing to sue anybody in the government. This is the problem, right? Like with Lois Lerner and those people, they get away with this stuff and they never get prosecuted. You can't even sue them. It's very hard to sue them. So what we did is we created a special provision in law. This is a Dan Bishop, Harriet Hageman bill that I co-sponsored. They are attorneys. I am not, but they figured this out. And so I co-sponsored it. It gives you the ability to sue somebody in their individual private capacity as a government agent if they sequester your speech using what they did in the Twitter files. There's another thing I think we could do, pertains to Section 230, which gives Section 230 is when the internet was just starting out, they were afraid it would get sued out of existence and that other countries that weren't as litigious as us would get the advantage in the internet. So they put this law in there, and it's Section 230, and it gives immunity to big tech. And I think it gives too much immunity in the wrong direction. So the idea is that if they don't censor something, let's say somebody said that you could drink lighter fluid and I don't know, cure indigestion. Somebody puts that on a social media platform. If Facebook or Twitter doesn't ban that, they still don't get sued. Okay. I think that's fair enough. We don't want, even if it's something as crazy as that, you don't want social media companies being liable for anything anybody says. But I think they should have liability if they censor you in a way that's hurtful. Like, for instance, if you could show damages from being censored by one of the social media companies, I don't think Section 230 should cover that instance. That would, and taking them into court is the quickest way to get them to behave.
Moving on to the topic of education, Trump has made efforts, or Republicans have, and with the leadership of Trump, have defunded much of the Department of Education. Do you favor completely eliminating the Department of Education and then the decisions being related to education policy and return to the states?
I think you should return the decision and the money to the states. And the reality is this administration has not defunded the Department of Education. I'm sorry. Go look at it. This line item, the debt and the deficit are still going up because the stuff they said they would do under Doge or defund or change, they have not done. They may have moved it around under a different title, but it's still there. They haven't gotten rid of it. It's not what you think it is. I have a bill to eliminate the Department of Education, one sentence long. On December 31st of 2026, the Department of Education shall terminate. That's the bill. That's the whole bill. I'm hoping my colleagues will read it if it's one sentence. It's shorter than the title. Uh, am I anti-education? No. Am I anti-public education? No. I actually, I went to K through 12 here in Kentucky in the public school. And I had some really good teachers. So I'm not anti-public education. There should be education freedom. You should be able to take that money if you don't want to spend it at a public school and take it somewhere else. But I want to get rid of the Department of Education because I don't think we need a national school board, and I don't think that we're well served by that. I think that in Frankfurt, they can make better decisions, and the best decisions are made at home with the parents.
Very good. Moving on with the education topic, would you favor increasing the federal tax scholarship write-offs from $1,700, which is law right now, to $5,000?
I would, but let's put an asterisk on it. When I read some of these bills that are supposed to give you more educational freedom, you got to look at how they define scholarship tax credit, because that's then where they impose more rules on education. If they get to define what that is, they may define, scholarships to magnet schools, but not to some other school, or, you have to read the fine print. Generally, yeah.
Very good. Election integrity, and then we're going to maybe have one more question and then move to a lightning round if you're good with that. Election integrity is the next topic, two-part question. An issue of concern is mail-in voting, which is vulnerable to fraud. What's your position on mail-in voting?
So I think you should have to, unless you're infirm or serving overseas, or just outright incapacitated and can't be there that day, you should have to vote in person. I mean, in foreign countries where we try to establish legitimate elections, we make you put your finger in ink, so you can't come back later that day, unless you scrub really hard or have a fake finger or something. I think there should be a warm body that has to vote. And let me tell you, and I have offered amendments. So I discovered that a postmaster at a post office can change the date on a postmark. And this has happened. And I offered an amendment to make it a federal crime to post date or predate, I guess I should say, an envelope that has a ballot. And they wouldn't let it get a vote. And you would think it's illegal already, but it's not. The postmaster at the local post office can control that machine. So I'll tell you how I learned this. My late wife applied to Harvard and MIT. She got into both schools. She was brilliant, genius. One was due on January 1st, one application. One was due on December 31st. So which one are you going to get done first? December 31st. She got that done. I helped her with it. We rushed to the post office. We went home to relax. We had, 24 more hours to do the next one, and realized that no post office in the United States is open on January 1st.
Yeah.
So there's no way to do that other application. So I'm not going to tell you which post office. She convinced a postmaster to put the December 31st date on her Harvard application. And she got into Harvard. So I know they can do that with ballots. Here's the problem, the fundamental problem. You might say, well, it's not fair. Everybody can't show up to vote. I learned how you buy elections in my first county judge executive race. I ran against an incumbent, and then there was another guy in the race who was the least scrupulous. So when they open ballots in Kentucky, and I believe you should do this in all the states, they open the absentees first. before the other polls close. That way, you know, you're not finding more absentees just for the purpose of changing the elections. And, um, and so they opened the absentees first. Well, in that, my very first political race, they opened the absentees and I had lost. And it didn't feel right. I thought, man, I thought I was going to win this race. And I thought that dude was in third place. How did he win the absentees? And later that night, the polls closed and I won every precinct in the county. So then I talked to people about this guy that came in third. And he was famous for going into nursing homes and offering money to people if they would order their mail-in ballot. Now, Kentucky does make it harder. They don't send you the ballot automatically. Like, I do think we have pretty good elections in Kentucky. But he was able to do that. And then he would go to poorer families, give them $100 bill, make sure everybody in the household got the mail-in ballot, and then he would show up and help them fill it out. If you want to pay somebody for their vote, what's the problem with, I mean, what keeps you from doing it? Because you could pay that person, they could walk in there, pull the curtain and vote the other way. There's no way to prove you bought the vote unless somebody is there watching them fill it out. And that's the problem with mail-in ballots. And even husbands and wives, like, I remember my mom would vote and she'd come home and dad say, who did you vote for? She said, I'm not going to tell you. No, they're both Republicans. Okay. But if you're filling it out at home, whoever is the dominant person in the household is going to control every ballot in the household. And if there's any money to be had, you can buy mail-in elections. And that's why I don't think we should do it.
Actually got a couple more questions, but if we could keep them brief and then we'll go to the lightning round. Do you support reinstating President Trump's tariffs?
So most of these tariffs are still in place. The one that went away was the one that was predicated on national emergencies. And he was using, and by the way, I am not, completely against tariffs. If we could replace the income tax, if we could go back to 1913 and not have an income tax and instead fund the government with tariffs, I could do that. I mean, I'd be all for now. Let's repeal the 16th Amendment and go back to just tariffs. The problem with doing them by executive order, according to the manufacturers that I've talked to in Kentucky, like I went to a manufacturer in west of here. They make the seats for Ford F-250s, and they make them like 4 hours before it goes in the F-250. They're like building them and taking them over. They build part of the seat in Mexico, part of the seat in Canada, part of the seat in the United States. And the final assembly, the stuff that requires the most skill, happens in the United States. The sewing happens in Mexico. They said, if we know this tariff is going to be in place permanently, we would move our equipment. We don't even need to buy equipment. We would just move the stuff in Mexico to the United States and start doing it. But we don't know that it's permanent. And number two, we have to pay 50% tariff on our equipment that we already own when we bring it from Mexico to the United States. So if you're going to reinstate them, I think Congress should have a debate. And we should have some common sense things like if the goal is to reshore manufacturing, we're not going to tariff tooling if it's to set up new manufacturing lines. So there's the caveat. Congress should vote on it. It's Congress's power. The power to institute a tax clearly resides not just in the Senate, but in the House specifically. And when the founders thought of taxes, they thought of tariffs. So it should be in place.
Very good. Last questions regarding political violence. There have been 2 assassination attempts on President Trump. Charlie Kirk was assassinated back in September of last year. What, if any, is the responsibility for political leaders to move us away from threats and political violence like we've seen?
I have not been, physically harmed. There is a person in prison who did threaten to harm me. And I do get death threats. Most of them aren't stupid enough to use their own cell phone like that guy was. It's, it's a serious thing, but I'm not sure that the blame rests with any one particular person.
Can I rephrase
Yeah.
that maybe to help bring some clarity? And I apologize if it was not clear. Should our political leaders take leadership when it comes to tamping down the violent rhetoric, the ugliness, the threats that are going on? Is there a role for political leaders to speak into that?
Generally, I agree with that, but then they're going to find some tweak and say I'm criticizing the president for something he said, which I'm not. Uh, I'm not going to do that here or anywhere. I mean, I've got a thick skin. I think what matters the most is that people know their elections are secure and fair. Because what drives people to desperation to harm somebody is if they feel like they have no control and the person they're trying to harm shouldn't be there about their illegitimate. So that's one of the reasons the SAVE Act is important. That's one of the reasons voting in person is important. When the election is over, and it should happen on one day, not 30 days, and it should end on that day, it shouldn't go past that day. It's not just important that we have fair and safe elections. It's that everybody knows it and perceives it as such. And we're not there on either account yet. And I think that's what causes people to be more violent. I also think uh, people, they think that their government is all about the executive branch, and they go into despair if it's not their president. And I think we need more civics in this country. I mean, this would have, I guess, more death threats on me if this works, but that Congress should have more power, regardless of who the president is. And if you don't win, if your person doesn't win president, but one of your people is a senator or a congressman, then at least you still have a voice. And I think people forget that. And so I think that's why it's dangerous to have elections that aren't fair or aren't perceived as fair. And it's dangerous that people don't understand civics and the role of Congress. And if that's my last question, I don't know, is there more?
Well, but we're going to do a lightning round. Then I'll give you the time for a closing statement.
Okay.
If that's okay.
Yeah.
Fair enough.
Yep.
Okay. So with the lightning round, Congressman Massie, I'm going to read a statement or a term, and you just simply say yes or no. We're going to try to cover.
You're asking a politician?
Yeah, yes or no. That's it. Otherwise, we're disqualified.
Okay.
No. There might be some overlap in things we've talked about, but
Okay.
we're going to go ahead and hit them anyway. Okay. Clear? Ready to go?
How many seconds do I have?
I'll put the timer for 2 seconds. Okay.
I'm ready.
Very good. Here we go. School choice.
Yes.
Biological boys on girls sports teams. Always
Absolutely not. And I have voted in the Judiciary Committee on a bill that would ban this in the agency, the certifying sports associations that qualify you for the Olympics. So basically, I have voted to ban this in the Olympics, and there's a way to do it that doesn't infringe on privacy.
Very good. Cut federal income taxes.
Absolutely, but you got to cut spending too.
Okay. Balanced budget amendment.
What? I voted for it. It's a great idea, but the one in Congress allows you to override it with 2/3 vote, which they commonly do. So it's not going to work, the one they passed.
So in principle, if you had an ideal bill that would truly balance the budget.
Yeah.
That's what I should have asked.
Okay. Well, balanced budget amendment, but I would make the federal government go back to the states to authorize it if they wanted to unbalance it in a given year.
Okay. Fair enough. Local law enforcement should work with federal ICE officers to hold illegal immigrants for up to 48 hours.
Absolutely. And I voted for this in Judiciary Committee.
War with Iran without the War Powers Resolution.
Dude, it does injustice to our soldiers not to give them a clear mission. So there needs to be an act of Congress, whether it's an act of war or an AUMF, there needs to be something.
Term limits.
Term limits.
For Congress in particular.
Yeah. I vote for those. I voted for it most recently in the Judiciary Committee. And I did not pledge to limit myself the first time I ran, which is an accusation, but
banning Congress members from trading individual stocks while they're in office.
yes. or make them announce the trade 2 days before, so you guys can trade on the inside.
Very good. All right. Great job. You did pretty good for keeping them. What do you have as a closing statement, up to 2 minutes? How about 3 minutes, Zach?
Okay.
You're a good sport. You really fielded some tough questions, and I appreciate that. Before we begin that, I will point out, Commonwealth Policy Center has candidate comparisons on our website for all of the congressional races in Kentucky, including this one. So if you'd like to see how Congressman Massie responded and how his opponents responded, you can go to CommonwealthPolicyCenter.org. I know it's a shameless plug, right? Go to CommonwealthPolicyCenter.org and you will find them on our website. They should be up there anytime. It's not up there right now. So it should be soon. All right. Any questions? No, we're not going to take questions. I think Congressman Massie will be available afterwards for a few minutes, so you'll have a chance there.
It's okay. We got to hard out.
All right. With that said, 3 minutes.
Okay.
Closing statement.
So the problem in Washington, D.C. is you got all these people who make you promises, and then they get there and they go along to get along. I'm running against a guy who promises to go along to get along. I don't think that's a good approach to civics or to the Republic. Depending on which statistic you want to look at, I vote with the party 80 or 90% of the time. I bet if you went up there and voted, it would be a similar number. I know you've shaken your fist at the TV. You've been mad at Lindsey Graham or Mitch McConnell or somebody up there. A lot of times those are the ones voting with the party. I am not going to take a suicide pact to vote with Mitch McConnell and Lindsey Graham and all those other people up there every time. That does not serve anybody well. I will do what I've been doing. I'll read the bills. I'll try to make my best decision based on what's best for you all here. It's important to me. I may not always take the right vote, but when I do take a vote, it's not because somebody bought me out. If we disagree on something, you can trust that it's not because some lobbyist got to me and said, you should do this or you should do that. The chain of command in the military it goes to the commander in chief, who also happens to be the president. The chain of command in our government, in a republic, I don't work for the president. I don't even work for the Speaker of the House. Yeah, we vote for the Speaker of the House. By the way, I work for you all. I work for 750,000. We talked about elections and whether, they're safe or not. I've observed over 400 congressional elections be stolen every year. How is that? They get elected and then they go up and they take their voting card. This voting card belongs to you all. We vote for speaker on the first day. And then virtually for the next 2 years, the speaker has that card to use. He doesn't carry it with him, but he's carrying most of the cards of the Republican Party. That is not the way the Republic should work. And it's not a way that works out. When they say I vote with Democrats, it may be that Democrats are voting no on a budget because they want to spend more money. I'm voting no because I want to spend less. What would happen if the bill fails? We would go back and write a more conservative bill, right? It's not that we would go write something that pleases the Democrats if we're in the majority. That's how the place works. So you could take any vote, you can distort it. The biggest reform we need, which we've mentioned here today, is to have separate votes on separate topics. That would matter more than term limits. It would matter more than a balanced budget amendment. It would matter more than any amendment we could put in the Constitution because it fixes the feedback loop. If we had separate votes on separate things, it wouldn't matter how many millions of dollars of ads you run talking about somebody's votes. That would actually be helpful in that case because you'd have to say what we did and didn't vote for individually. So I will keep working for you all if you send me back. I'm here because I'm not afraid of answering your questions. I'm not afraid of interacting. And maybe you guys got to watch me say something that will be used in one of my opponent's commercials next week. because they clip stuff out and just use that part. Anyways, and whether I win or not, I'm going to thank all of you right here tonight for letting me do this job for you. It's not easy, but it can be fun. It's frustrating most days, but then occasionally you do have victories, and I take it so seriously. I don't take myself seriously. The problem we have in Washington, D.C. is everybody takes themselves seriously, but then they don't take their job seriously. It's a lot easier job if you just go along to get along. You never have to read a bill. Your staff doesn't even have to read the bills. You know what you're going to do when you get to the floor because the whip team hands you the list. And I've got my own list when I get there. It's a list that I try to come up with that's the best for you. Thank you and God bless.